D2L's vision is to transform the way the world learns. Join Karen Hedrick of D2L's accessibility team and Dr. Mahadeo Sukhai in a conversation about the opportunities online learning presents for reducing barriers to education.
Hi, Dr. Sukhai. Tell me a little bit about CNIB and your role there.
Well, so I am CNIB's Head of Research and Chief Accessibility Officer. I direct the national research programs of CNIB as well as run a team that oversees our organizational culture change work around accessibility and inclusion. I've always wanted to be a scientist. I've always wanted to be on the vanguard of human knowledge, and I've always wanted to teach that and translate that to the world at large. When I was in third year, I took a lab course in genetics, and as I usually did, I would go to my faculty at the start of each semester if they were new to me or me to them, and I would say, by the way, I just wanted you to know I'm a person with a visual impairment, I'm registered in your class. She looked at me, blinked a few times. She said, wow, you're the first blind geneticist I ever heard of. And so I went into science totally discounting the blind bit. And so for this faculty member to say, you're the first blind scientist or the first blind geneticist I ever heard of, that really threw me for a loop, and it got me to say, well, okay, is that really true? And so I got interested in understanding why I did that and why didn't anyone else do that, because to me it didn't seem like that was such an onerous thing. Why wouldn't anyone else want to do this? Right? Why wouldn't anyone else decide that they wanted to be a scientist with a visual disability, or for that matter, a hearing disability, in genetics or biochemistry or neurobiology or whatever? Like, what was unique about my experience? What was unique about my circumstance? And that's how I got interested in it, to the point where now it's a growing conversation, this conversation around equity, diversity, and inclusion in science. But now it's an increasingly important conversation, because if we don't have the conversation, then what's going to end up happening is nobody who goes through this space going forward. So the next kid who decides, I want to be a geneticist, who is congenitally blind or who's partially sighted, they're going to think they're doing it on their own. And they're not, because there's precedence. There's now enough precedence that we can figure out what to do about it.
D2L's goal and vision is to transform the way the world learns and reduce barriers to education. What are your thoughts about learning?
Everyone has the capability to do it. Each of us does it in a different way. We need to understand that. We need to teach to that. And we need to exploit those differences in learning potential to allow everyone to grow to the capacity that they all have the capability of growing to.
How is online learning good for expanding education, especially for those with print disabilities?
Online learning is actually really important. We think about online learning, we think about blended classrooms, we think about the accessibility of education and putting education in the hands of people who don't ordinarily get education. And online learning provides a way of doing it, because you think about that, you take transportation out of the equation. You take a lot of cost out of the equation. You take various issues around in-person classroom access out of the equation. And then you transpose the environment to being virtual and online. And so if the educational material is presented in a comprehensive enough, creative enough way, then there are huge opportunities for people with all disabilities, not just print disabilities.
So how do online methods help STEM education, and why is that important?
So there's simulations that are online that can be tagged as part of online learning. All kinds of videos, all kinds of cartoons, all kinds of different ways that we represent scientific concepts. And those are the sorts of things that are not so easy to use in a classroom setting, but are a lot easier to use in an online setting.
So how can everybody work together to make learning a more inclusive experience?
Carefully. Identify all the stakeholders. Make sure that they all come to the table. Make sure that they all understand what part they're playing in learning, because everybody's playing a different part. The learner's playing a part, the educator's playing a part, the course developer's playing a part, the designer's playing a part, the community service provider's playing a part. Everybody plays a part. Understand what everyone brings to the table, understand what everyone's objectives in the whole process end up being and are, and from that point start a common conversation. the point that I'm making is we assume that because of differential abilities, people can't learn. I think that's a very faulty assumption. I think we learn differently. And once we actually get it out of our heads that disability equals not being able to learn, and get it into our heads that every different stripe of ability means that all of us learn differently, all of us intake information differently, process it differently, communicate it differently, then I think we're going to be in a space where we can start teaching to those differences and actually teaching to the strengths of all of our learners.